I'm unsure if this was all my fault. The walls collapsed and turned into a watery black substance as my legs run and weave through what used to be my home. The city, the town, the village, the people, the houses, the Pokemon. All of them were lost in the tides of darkness, screaming for their lives as they drowned amongst the ink. There was no light to run towards, but the need to escape, the feeling there was a place where all the darkness would stop chasing me. I lied to myself. There was no escape. Instead, I faced the edge. The very edge of the abyss, only to turn around and get swept under. The liquid filled my lungs, my eyes. It was like my lungs were full of fiberglass. I wasn't dead. I wasn't dying. I was still awake, present. I was still alive. Green eyes stared at me from the darkness. I could hear the watery sounds of organs swimming around. It offered me a choice. It offered me safety, a chance. I accepted despite knowing better. Once I saw the light of the moon cast down on me, I wasn't human. Not at the moment. I was a bird, Murkrow, but that form didn't last long as I reverted back to normal. A human with a full black, inky right arm, a black hat resting on my head with a tail wagging slowly behind me. The role I was given, to weed out the weak, I accepted with haste. The world I was in. I knew the location. Without orders, I already knew where I needed to go to start my role. The gym, which was now run by someone who used to be one of my friends. He was sitting at the top. He was half asleep, however, a bottle of alcohol resting in his hand as he yawned before spotting me. He greeted me with a wave, like he already knew who I was. Without knowing a thing, my lips moved. I was sent here by Red. I found him. A flame alit in those eyes. He stood and hopped through the puzzle, rushing to me. He was joyous, despite how he previously looked. He begged me to take him to his rival. I felt myself smirk as I took his hand on my own and turned away from him, pulling him along. Out of the gym, out of the town, out of the region, technically. The snow was thick. The air was cold. I could taste the snow in the air as we trekked through that which lay on the mountain. He was shivering, asking where I had been. I never responded, and soon he gave up on the conversation. It took a few minutes of weaving and leading through the rough trails marked with thorns and poisonous plants, but eventually I stopped. He was sniffling and shaking, snow covering his hair, shoulders, and boots. What's wrong?" he asked. I frowned and he seemed to pick up on the meaning. "We're lost? Seriously?" I nodded my head. He was angry, but sad too. I could sense that in how frustrated he looked. He tried to turn around, only to collapse. I felt myself grin as he attempted to push himself up from the snow. A howl and snarl echoed from the path. The wolves were here already. Just a little too early for my taste, but it got the job done. He was terrified. The wolves came close, slowly watching as their prey clung to a tree stump, pulling himself to lay on top of it. They weren't afraid of him. They were hungry. They would feast as they leapt on top of him. Their teeth were driving into flesh as he screamed. I watched, and I chuckled softly. It took a lot of energy to turn back into a Murkrow, but as soon as I flew. My wings were cold, but it was bearable, even if it was hard to see through the falling snow. I made it to the peak and landed. The trainer atop the mountain turned to me as I became human once more. He wasn't shivering, even in such extreme temperatures. I faked the tears. "Blue was looking for you." I didn't need to say anything. The implication was enough as his eyes widened and he dashed past me. I followed after him, leading him to the right direction as he silently asked me questions that I never answered. There was a perfect ledge, looking down into the forest path where the feast had taken place. A heartbroken gasp left the man's throat as he peered down at the corpse full of holes and gnawings lying on top of the tree stump. His sob was followed by a strange expression, a suspicion. He turned to me and, well, acting meek was just prolonging his death, and there wasn't much fun in it. It wasn't my job. I tilted my head and smiled. He grabbed onto my shoulders with a silent accusation, silent questions. I felt myself blink and move, prying his hands off before pushing him off the ledge. The fall ended with a sick crack of bone. It was a strange sight, seeing two corpses atop tree stumps. I'm sure there's a metaphor in there somewhere. It was funny though. So funny that I couldn't stop laughing as soon as I started. They were so stupid. Were they blind? Were they just ignorant? Idiots! What idiots! It feels so good. It feels so good to laugh at them, to taunt that idiocy. It felt... The realization hit me like hail. Why am I here? Why am I laughing? They were my friends. Why? The tears running down my face stung as they froze on my skin. I don't belong here. I'm not from here. Those green eyes, that monster, was it watching me? I looked around. There was no green-eyed thing watching me from afar. No, there was no such thing, but there was a saw. Maybe it was a sick idea, a twisted idea, but I took the steps towards it, ripping it from the bark and holding it to my human arm. That thing, it wasn't there watching, because it didn't have to be, did it? It could watch me from my own body. It could watch my thoughts from the inside. Committing to the idea didn't take much thought. It took longer making the way down alone than it did going up with someone. But out the gym, there was a person, a trainer, their short bluish hair blowing in the wind. "Ethan," I called with a freezing breath. He turned to me and grinned, waving. "Leaf! I didn't expect you to come back already." He then took note of the saw. "What's with that?" I took the necessary steps to plant the saw in his hand. I presented the inky arm. He was confused. He needed a command, didn't he? What is he, a Pokemon? It'd be funny if it weren't so sad. "Cut it off," I growled, seriousness dripping from the words. He looked horrified. He asked me the normal questions, like the why and the why yet again. I said nothing, just glaring into his soul. He must have gotten the message as he looked around before taking my hand and leading me to the trees. A well lay in the middle of the forest where we stopped. He asked if I was sure. I nodded my head firmly, pointing to just below the shoulder. The pain was sickening. It took all my willpower to not throw up as the saw's rusted teeth grit and ripped through ink-black flesh, the blood dripping down also being the same color. He was biting his tongue as he sawed as quick as he could. He must have felt sick too, the color missing from his face as if he was about to throw up right on the spot. But he didn't, as the saw and the arm clattered to the ground. He panted in shock, and in an attempt to not give in to nausea, I smiled despite the pain, hand covering the stump leaking red and black. I thanked him. That blood, that arm, it began to move. It began to move towards the well. In shock, we couldn't move, watching as it tossed itself into the water inside the stone structure. The splash was loud and echoed through the walls and out through the top. The well's water, it bubbled out. It bubbled out black ink. Ethan stepped back, but his leg was already encased in it. I moved as fast as I could backwards as the ink began to turn into a wave, green eyes swimming through it before piercing out of the black mass. "You will be lost amongst the darkness." I was already running, just as you were before. The wall collapses and turns into an ocean as my legs run and weave through what used to be the forest. The city, the town, the village, the people, the houses, the Pokemon. All of them were lost in the tides of darkness, screaming for their lives as they drowned amongst the ink. There was a single light to run towards, the need to escape, the feeling there was a place where all the darkness would stop chasing me. I hadn't lied to myself. There was what looked like an escape. Tripping over in the snow, I raced to the path at the very top of the mountain. But fate be, the rocks below my feet began to crumble. The feeling of falling stopped as I glided to the floor, smaller and wings spread open, landing near two tree stumps. Turning human, I heard the weeping of two creatures. In front of my face were two phantoms, both sets of their eyes glowing green. They were there. They were lost. It was my fault they were lost. It was my fault. I grabbed onto them and held them close to my chest with one arm. Both of the ghosts chafed in confusion as I sprint through the snow, watching the oncoming darkness as I ran straight towards it. With the spirits held close, with my eyes closed, I feared the nightmare with full speed. It was hard to keep track of how long it took, but the sounds of wood met my ears, and despite my fear, I opened my eyes. A house. A small, normal house. I let go of the spirits. I knew they wouldn't leave me as I looked around, my breath catching in my throat as I panted out the nerves. The house was small, with a simple bed in the corner, a TV, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a dining table. There was a surprising lack of actual items like cups or pans or the like. Due to that, The book lying open on the table caught my attention. The ghost drifted around the space as I stepped closer, my hand gently touching the page as I read what was written. An idea hit me. I grabbed the required pages and tore them out, the ripping of the paper bringing the ghost over in curiosity. I looked over to them one more time. With a building determination, I held the sheets tight in my fist. I gestured the ghost to follow, and they did, both flinching as I kicked open the door to the outside. The inky black sky and the red and white burnt-destroyed wasteland stood still as I stepped out of the house, hearing a crack, turning to watch the foundations collapse on itself. The only standing house for miles, destroyed. The ghost rests on my shoulders. I closed my eyes, pulling my head down slightly. I opened them, my tail wagging slowly. With my own plan, I walked towards the unknown. I walked towards the new world.